If the scale has not moved in weeks, some important metabolic changes are not always immediately visible externally. Deep inside the abdomen, visceral fat is stored deeper within the abdominal cavity, around internal organs. But the moment your metabolism begins to shift, your body can start reducing this hidden fat long before dramatic changes appear on the outside. Many metabolic improvements begin internally before visible body changes appear. For decades, many people were taught to believe that improving health required suffering. Endless cardio sessions, punishing workout plans, and extreme diets became symbols of discipline. But modern metabolic research paints a very different picture. The human body responds far better to consistency than to exhaustion. In many cases, sustainable fat loss begins with something far simpler: a modest calorie deficit combined with regular daily movement. Visceral fat, the deep abdominal fat linked to metabolic dysfunction, appears especially responsive to this steady approach. Studies suggest that even moderate physical activity can help reduce visceral fat accumulation, sometimes without aggressive dieting at all. That is because movement does far more than burn calories. It improves insulin sensitivity, influences hormone regulation, and helps the body access stored energy more efficiently over time. Instead of fighting against your biology, the goal is learning to work with it. Small daily actions repeated consistently often create far more lasting change than short periods of extreme restriction ever could. What happens to visceral fat after your body finally begins breaking it down? Surprisingly, it does not simply vanish. Once fat is converted into usable energy, the body must remove the remaining byproducts through natural metabolic processes. Research shows that most of this fat is ultimately transformed into carbon dioxide and released through the lungs during breathing. The rest gradually leaves the body as water through sweat, urine, and other fluid loss. Every walk, every staircase, and every movement that raises oxygen demand becomes part of this process. Your body is constantly exchanging energy and releasing waste products with every breath you take. Even during sleep, the lungs continue participating in this quiet metabolic cycle, but faster is not always better. Visceral fat can store various compounds over time, and rapid weight loss approaches may place additional stress on metabolic regulation and energy balance. Sustainable fat loss tends to place less stress on the system, allowing metabolism, hormones, and energy regulation to adapt more smoothly. Most metabolic changes begin quietly. Before the mirror reflects anything noticeable, your energy, cravings, and hunger patterns may already be shifting beneath the surface. One of the earliest shifts often starts within the first 24 hours after reducing sugary drinks, limiting late-night snacking, and cutting back on heavily processed foods. These simple adjustments can help lower insulin levels, a hormone deeply involved in energy storage and fat regulation. When insulin remains constantly elevated, the body tends to prioritize storing energy rather than accessing stored fat. But as insulin levels gradually decline, the body becomes more capable of turning toward its own internal energy reserves. This metabolic transition is one reason many people begin noticing steadier energy and fewer intense cravings after improving their eating pattern. The process is not instant or magical. It is biology adapting to a different environment. Over time, the body slowly becomes more metabolically flexible, creating a more sustainable path toward long-term fat loss, improved energy balance, and better overall metabolic health. The first 24 hours can feel surprisingly uncomfortable. Some people notice temporary fatigue, mild irritability, headaches, or stronger hunger signals as their eating patterns begin to change. These reactions can feel discouraging, especially when motivation is still fragile. But in many cases, they simply reflect the body adjusting to a different energy environment. After years of relying on quick sugar intake and constant energy spikes, your system suddenly has to operate differently. When that pattern suddenly changes, the body needs time to improve its ability to access stored fuel more efficiently. This transition period is often where many people mistakenly believe their new habits are failing. Behind the discomfort, important biological changes may already be underway. Hormones, appetite regulation, and energy balance are beginning to recalibrate gradually. That temporary discomfort does not necessarily mean something is wrong. Sometimes, it is simply evidence that your metabolism is learning to operate differently, creating the foundation for more stable energy and long-term metabolic flexibility. Around the second and third day, a deeper metabolic transition starts unfolding behind the scenes. Fat cells within the abdomen gradually begin releasing stored fatty acids into the bloodstream, where they are transported primarily to the liver. Inside the liver, those fatty acids are either processed, stored, or converted into usable fuel, depending on the body's energy demands. Food quality starts mattering even more during this phase. The goal is not starvation or rigid dieting. A balanced intake of protein, fiber, healthy fats, and minimally processed foods helps support normal liver function while giving the body a steadier energy supply. When the system is no longer overwhelmed by constant spikes of sugar and excess calories, metabolism often becomes more stable and efficient over time. Over time, the body becomes more comfortable relying on stored fuel instead of constantly searching for incoming calories. That gradual improvement in metabolic flexibility is one reason sustainable lifestyle changes tend to produce more lasting results than aggressive short-term approaches. The earliest signs of metabolic improvement rarely appear as dramatic changes on the scale. More often, they show up quietly in everyday life. Meals no longer leave you feeling painfully heavy or bloated. Your waistline starts feeling slightly less restricted inside the same clothes. By late afternoon, energy becomes steadier instead of collapsing into the familiar cycle of cravings, fatigue, and brain fog. Progress often appears in ordinary moments first. Less bloating after meals, steadier focus, and fewer cravings can all reflect deeper changes happening internally. Blood sugar regulation begins stabilizing, appetite signals become less chaotic, and energy production gradually grows more consistent throughout the day. Even sleep quality and mental clarity may improve before visible fat loss becomes obvious externally. That is why the scale rarely tells the full story during the early stages of fat loss. Some of the most important transformations begin deep within metabolism, digestion, and hormone regulation, long before the mirror fully catches up to what is already happening internally. Reaching the first full week of consistent lifestyle changes often feels different than people expect. The transformation is not always dramatic from the outside, yet subtle improvements may begin appearing throughout daily life. Energy becomes steadier, afternoon crashes lose their intensity, and ordinary tasks can start feeling less physically draining than before. Much of this improvement may be linked to declining visceral fat and lower inflammatory signaling. Deep abdominal fat is not simply stored energy. It also interacts with inflammation, hormone signaling, and metabolic regulation throughout the body. As visceral fat gradually decreases, inflammatory stress inside the system may begin easing as well. When inflammatory stress begins calming down, the effects often spread throughout the entire body. Sleep may deepen, morning stiffness can ease. Even facial puffiness sometimes begins fading. Physical recovery after walking or light exercise may also feel easier as energy regulation becomes more efficient over time. These early changes often reflect meaningful metabolic improvements already happening beneath the surface. Weeks 2 and 3 are often where deeper metabolic changes begin accelerating beneath the surface. Hunger signals, energy regulation, and fat metabolism may gradually become more stable as visceral fat continues declining. One important shift involves adiponectin, a hormone closely connected to insulin sensitivity and energy balance. Higher adiponectin activity is associated with improved fat utilization and greater metabolic flexibility over time. Another major player is leptin, the hormone responsible for helping the brain recognize fullness after eating. When visceral fat remains elevated for long periods, appetite signaling often becomes less reliable. Over time, improving metabolic function may help restore clearer communication between the gut, fat, tissue, and brain. Cravings often become less aggressive, normal portions feel more satisfying, and constant thoughts about food may begin fading into the background. Healthy eating begins requiring less constant mental effort. Once hormones and appetite signals operate more efficiently, maintaining healthier eating patterns usually feels more natural and far less mentally exhausting on a daily basis. Somewhere between weeks 3 and 6, the internal changes often begin becoming visible externally. Clothing starts fitting differently, waist measurements gradually shrink, and everyday movement may feel noticeably more comfortable. For many people, this is the stage where progress finally begins feeling real instead of purely theoretical. One reason these changes can appear surprisingly quickly is that visceral fat tends to respond faster to lifestyle improvements than subcutaneous fat stored directly beneath the skin. Visceral fat is highly metabolically active, meaning it reacts more rapidly to changes in energy balance, physical activity, sleep quality, and insulin regulation. Because of this, waist circumference often becomes a more meaningful sign of progress than body weight alone. Belts may loosen before the scale changes dramatically, and sitting for long periods may feel less restrictive than before. By this point, the internal progress that once felt invisible finally starts becoming noticeable in everyday life. By the second and third month, the process often becomes about far more than simple weight loss. Many of the deeper metabolic adaptations are now working together more consistently, creating noticeable improvements in daily function, energy regulation, and overall physical comfort. Blood sugar patterns may become steadier throughout the day, reducing the intense highs and crashes that once drove constant hunger and fatigue. Liver fat can gradually decline as the body improves its ability to process and utilize stored energy more efficiently. Physical stamina may also improve, making ordinary movement feel easier and less exhausting than before. Even breathing and sleep quality sometimes change during this stage. Reduced abdominal pressure around internal organs can make the body feel lighter, less compressed, and more comfortable during both activity and rest. What makes these changes powerful is their cumulative effect. Small habits repeated consistently begin reshaping the internal environment that controls metabolism, inflammation, appetite, and recovery. Gradually, the body gradually shifts toward a more stable and regulated physiological state. This content is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe to support the channel. Thanks for the support.